London, 1847. Lady Margaret Kensington stared at the newspaper in her hands, the words blurring before her eyes as she read the announcement for the third time. Her breath caught in her throat, and she fought to maintain her composure as the reality of what she was reading sank in. Lord Maxwell Kincaid announces his betrothal to Lady Elizabeth Harrington, daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland. The wedding is to take place next month at St. George's Church, Hanover Square. She set the paper down with trembling hands, grateful that she was alone in the morning room. The servants would be bustling about elsewhere in the grand townhouse, and her mother would not rise for at least another hour. No one would witness her momentary lapse in composure. Maxwell was to be married. The man who had once sworn his devotion to her, who had promised that they would find a way to be together despite her family's reduced circumstances, had apparently found it more convenient to align himself with one of the wealthiest families in England. Margaret smoothed the front of her simple blue morning dress, a reminder of how far the Kensingtons had fallen since her father's death 3 years prior. The crushing debts he had left behind had forced them to sell their country estate and most of their valuables. Only her mother's good name and distant relation to the Duke of Granville had preserved their place in society, though they existed now at its fringes, dependent on the generosity of relatives for invitations to events where Margaret might make a suitable match. A match that would save them from ruin, a match like the one Maxwell had just made for himself. "I was a fool," she whispered to the empty room. "Love is a luxury meant only for those with fortune and status." The door opened, and her mother swept in, already dressed in her morning clothes, her once beautiful face now perpetually lined with worry. "You've seen the announcement, then?" Lady Kensington said, nodding toward the paper. Margaret nodded. "I have." "It's for the best, Margaret. You must see that. The Kincaids were never going to accept you, not with our situation." Her mother poured herself a cup of tea and took a seat across from Margaret. "Lord Willoughby will be at the Harrington ball tomorrow evening. His first wife left him quite wealthy, and he's been widowed for over a year now. I've heard he seeks a new wife." Margaret looked up. "Lord Willoughby, mother, he's nearly 50 years old." "He's 47, and in excellent health." Lady Kensington's voice took on an edge of desperation. "We cannot afford to be particular, Margaret. Another season without a match, and we shall have to move in with your Aunt Beatrice in Bath. Is that what you want?" The thought of living with her mother's stern, disapproving sister made Margaret shudder. "No, of course not." "Then you will dance with Lord Willoughby tomorrow night, and you will be charming." Her mother reached across the table and patted Margaret's hand. "It is your duty, my dear. To yourself and to me." Margaret nodded, resignation settling over her like a shroud. "Yes, mother, I understand my duty." The Harrington ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, the light reflecting off the jewels adorning the necks and wrists of London's elite. Margaret stood with her mother near the entrance, observing the swirl of colourful silks and satins, the perfumed air thick with the scent of flowers and wealth. She felt woefully inadequate in her cream silk gown, reworked from one of her mother's old ball gowns by their skilled lady's maid. Though the alterations were cleverly done, Margaret knew that any lady with a discerning eye would recognize it as last season's fashion. But it was the best they could afford, and she held her head high despite her discomfort. "There he is," Lady Kensington murmured, nodding toward a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman with silver-streaked dark hair. "Lord Willoughby." Margaret took a deep breath and forced a smile. "He seems respectable." "More than respectable. He's wealthy, influential, and looking for a young wife. Go, my dear. I've already spoken with Lady Harrington. She will make the introduction." Before Margaret could protest, her mother was guiding her across the room toward their hostess, a plump, pleasant woman with a perpetual smile. Beside her stood Lord Willoughby, his eyes appraising Margaret with undisguised interest. "Lady Margaret Kensington, may I present Lord James Willoughby?" Lady Harrington said with a flourish. Lord Willoughby bowed deeply. "Lady Margaret, it is a pleasure. Would you do me the honor of the next dance?" His voice was cultured and deep, his manners impeccable. There was nothing objectionable about him, save for the calculating look in his eyes as they swept over her figure. Margaret felt like a prized mare being assessed for purchase. "The pleasure is mine, my lord," she replied, dipping into a curtsy. "I would be delighted." As he led her onto the dance floor, Margaret caught sight of a familiar figure entering the ballroom. Maxwell Kincaid, tall and handsome in his perfectly tailored evening clothes, his golden hair catching the candlelight. Beside him was a petite blonde woman, undoubtedly the Lady Elizabeth mentioned in the announcement. Margaret's heart constricted painfully, but she forced her attention back to Lord Willoughby as the music began. She moved through the steps of the quadrille mechanically, responding appropriately to his conversation while her mind drifted elsewhere. "You dance beautifully, Lady Margaret," Lord Willoughby commented, his hand lingering a moment too long on hers during a turn. "Thank you, my lord, you are too kind." "Not at all, I speak only the truth. Your mother tells me you are accomplished on the pianoforte as well." Margaret resisted the urge to glance in Maxwell's direction. "I play tolerably well, though I would not call myself accomplished." "Modesty becomes you," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I should very much like to hear you play sometime. Perhaps you might call at Willoughby House with your mother. I have an excellent instrument that rarely sees use these days." The invitation was proper enough, but Margaret understood its implications. Lord Willoughby was interested in pursuing her, just as her mother had hoped. "That would be lovely," she replied automatically, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. As the dance ended, Lord Willoughby escorted her back to her mother, who beamed with approval. He bowed again and moved away, promising to claim another dance before the evening ended. "Well done," Lady Kensington whispered. "He is clearly taken with you." Margaret nodded absently, her eyes scanning the room until they found Maxwell again. He was dancing with his fiancée now, their movements perfectly synchronized as they whirled about the floor. Something must have drawn his attention, for suddenly his gaze met hers across the room. For a heartbeat the years fell away and they were 18 again, dancing at her come-out ball when everything had seemed possible. Then his expression hardened and he looked deliberately away. "Margaret. Are you listening?" Her mother's voice broke through her reverie. "Forgive me, mother, I was distracted." Lady Kensington followed her gaze and sighed. "You must put him from your mind, Margaret. That chapter is closed." "I know," Margaret said softly. "Believe me, I know." The evening progressed much as Margaret had expected. She danced with Lord Willoughby twice more, endured the pitying glances of former friends who knew of her family's reduced circumstances, and avoided Maxwell with studied determination. By midnight, her feet ached from dancing, and her face hurt from maintaining a pleasant expression. She slipped away from the ballroom, seeking a moment of solitude in the adjoining conservatory. The glass-walled room was dimly lit and blessedly cool after the heat of the ballroom. Margaret moved among the exotic plants, breathing in their earthy fragrance, allowing herself a moment of honesty. If she married Lord Willoughby, her mother would be secure, they would have a comfortable life, but happiness, that seemed an impossible dream now. "Lady Margaret." She froze at the sound of the familiar voice, then turned slowly to face Maxwell Kincaid. He stood just inside the doorway, his expression unreadable in the shadowy light. He was every bit as handsome as she remembered, perhaps more so, with maturity lending a certain gravitas to his features. "Lord Kincaid," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "I believe congratulations are in order." He inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and buried memories. "Your fiancée is lovely," Margaret said finally, grasping for the social niceties that might get her through this encounter with her dignity intact. "She is." Maxwell took a step closer. "I saw you dancing with Willoughby." "3 times. There was an accusatory note in his voice that sparked Margaret's temper. "And why should that interest you?" "He's old enough to be your father." "He's a respectable widower with an excellent fortune," she replied coolly. "Precisely the sort of match my mother has been hoping for." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "So you'll sell yourself to the highest bidder, is that it?" The unfairness of his accusation strung like a physical blow. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare you judge me when you—" she broke off, unwilling to reveal how deeply his betrayal had wounded her. "When I what?" he demanded, moving closer still, close enough that she could see the anger in his eyes. when I'm doing exactly the same thing. Margaret stepped back, her shoulders colliding with a stone planter. Your engagement is hardly the same. Lady Elizabeth is young, beautiful, and from an excellent family. And wealthy, Maxwell added bitterly. Don't forget wealthy, that's the important part, isn't it? The Kincaid estates need money, and Elizabeth's dowry will provide it. Understanding dawned, and Margaret stared at him. Your marriage is one of convenience. My marriage is a duty, he corrected her. To my family name, to the tenants who depend on the estate, to generations of Kincaids who built what we have. His voice softened. Not all of us had the luxury of following our hearts, Margaret. The clock in the ballroom began to strike midnight, the sound drifting into the conservatory. Without warning, Maxwell closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. Dance with me, he said quietly. What here now? Margaret glanced toward the door. Someone might see. It's midnight, everyone is occupied with the supper being served. He drew her closer. One dance, Margaret. For old time's sake. She knew she should refuse, but when he placed one hand at her waist and held her other hand aloft, she found herself moving with him to the faint strains of music coming from the ballroom. They moved together in perfect harmony, as if the 3 years since their last dance had never existed. In the dim light of the conservatory, with midnight chiming around them, Margaret allowed herself to remember what it had felt like to love him, to believe he loved her. I never wanted to hurt you, Maxwell murmured, his breath warm against her ear. And yet you did, she replied softly. You promised we would find a way. I tried, his grip tightened. God knows I tried. But my father's gambling debts were worse than anyone knew. When he died, I discovered the truth. The estate was mortgaged to the hilt, the tenants unpaid, creditors circling like vultures. Margaret's heart constricted at the pain in his voice. You might have told me. And what could you have done? Your family's situation was hardly better than mine. Maxwell's bitter laugh held no humor. Two impoverished nobles cannot make a match, no matter how much they might wish to. The clock finished striking 12, and their dance slowed to a stop. They stood still, too close for propriety, neither willing to be the first to step away. We were young, Margaret said at last. Perhaps it's better this way. Love is a luxury meant only for those with fortune and status. Maxwell shook his head, his eyes searching hers. Do you truly believe that? Before she could answer, the conservatory door opened, flooding the space with light from the ballroom. They sprang apart, but not quickly enough. Lady Margaret. Are you in here? Lord Willoughby's voice preceded him into the room. He stopped short at the sight of them standing together, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Ah, I see you are, otherwise engaged. Maxwell bowed stiffly. Lord Willoughby, I was just leaving. With a final glance at Margaret, he strode past Willoughby and back into the ballroom, leaving her alone with her prospective suitor. Lord Willoughby approached her slowly, his expression speculative. I wasn't aware that you and Lord Kincaid were acquainted. We are old friends, Margaret replied, struggling to regain her composure. Nothing more. Indeed, his tone made it clear he didn't believe her. Old friends who meet in darkened conservatories during the supper dance. Margaret lifted her chin. I came here seeking a moment of quiet. Lord Kincaid happened upon me by chance. A fortunate chance for him, perhaps. Willoughby's smile was cold. I had hoped to claim you for supper, Lady Margaret, but I see your friendship with Lord Kincaid might complicate my interest in you. There is nothing between Lord Kincaid and myself, Margaret insisted. He is betrothed to Lady Elizabeth Harrington, as I'm sure you're aware. I am. Willoughby studied her for a long moment. And you seemed quite comfortable in the arms of a betrothed man. It makes one wonder what other liberties you might permit. The implication was unmistakable, and Margaret felt her face flush with indignation. If you are questioning my character, Lord Willoughby. Not at all, he interrupted smoothly. I am merely reassessing the situation. Good evening, Lady Margaret. With a curt bow, he turned and left her standing alone in the conservatory, her reputation hanging by the thinnest of threads. The carriage ride home was silent, Margaret's mother too exhausted to press for details about her conversations with Lord Willoughby. It was only the next morning, as they sat at breakfast, that the older woman broached the subject. "Lord Willoughby seemed quite taken with you initially," Lady Kensington observed, "but I noticed he did not seek you out after supper." Margaret stirred her tea, avoiding her mother's eyes. "No, he did not." "Did something happen, Margaret? Something you're not telling me?" Before she could formulate a response, their butler entered with the morning post on a silver tray. "A delivery for Lady Margaret," he announced, presenting her with a small envelope. Margaret recognized the handwriting immediately, and her heart raced as she broke the seal and unfolded the note. "Meet me at the Rosewood Tear Room at 2 o'clock, please. M.K." She quickly refolded the note before her mother could see it, tucking it into her pocket. "Who is it from, dear?" Lady Kensington inquired. "Just an invitation from Miss Catherine Reynolds to take tea," Margaret lied, naming a casual acquaintance her mother would not question. "This afternoon." Her mother nodded, seemingly satisfied. "That's nice, dear. Now about Lord Willoughby." "I fear I may have disappointed him," Margaret said carefully. "He expressed some concerns about my suitability." Lady Kensington's face paled. "What concerns? What did you do?" "Nothing improper, mother, I assure you." Margaret hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I believe he may have misinterpreted a conversation I was having with another guest." "Which guest?" Her mother's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Margaret sighed. "Lord Kincaid." "Maxwell Kincaid." Lady Kensington set down her teacup with a clatter. "Margaret, please tell me you weren't indiscreet with that young man." "Of course not. We merely spoke briefly in the conservatory. Lord Willoughby found us there and drew his own conclusions." Her mother pressed her fingers to her temples. "This is disastrous. If Willoughby speaks of this, if rumours begin." "Mother, nothing happened," Margaret insisted. "It was an innocent conversation." "There is no such thing as an innocent conversation between an unmarried lady and a betrothed gentleman in a darkened conservatory," Lady Kensington snapped. "You know better, Margaret. What were you thinking?" Margaret had no answer that would satisfy her mother. The truth, that for a few precious moments in Maxwell's arms, she had remembered what it felt like to hope, would only make matters worse. "I'm sorry, mother," she said finally. "I truly am." Lady Kensington's expression softened slightly. "What's done is done. We must pray that Lord Willoughby is discreet. In the meantime, perhaps it would be best if we accepted your Aunt Beatrice's invitation to visit Bath. A change of scene until this blows over." The thought of being exiled to Bath was appalling, but Margaret nodded dutifully. "If you think that's best." "I do." Her mother rose from the table. "I shall write to her today. We could leave as early as next week." Margaret waited until her mother had left the room before pulling out Maxwell's note again. She knew she should refuse his request, should stay as far away from him as possible to avoid further damage to her reputation. And yet at 2 o'clock that afternoon, she found herself entering the Rosewood Tear Room, her heart pounding as she searched the elegant establishment for a familiar face. Maxwell sat at a table near the back, partially concealed by a large potted fern. He rose as she approached, his expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I wasn't sure you would come," he said as she took the seat across from him. "I shouldn't have," Margaret replied, keeping her voice low. "If we're seen together again, it will only fuel gossip." "I know, and I apologize for putting you in this position." Maxwell signaled for the waiter, ordering tea for them both before continuing. "But I had to see you, to explain about last night." Margaret removed her gloves, carefully smoothing them on the table beside her. "There's nothing to explain. We were both foolish, and now I may pay the price for that foolishness. Lord Willoughby has all but withdrawn his interest." Maxwell's expression darkened. "Willoughby is a rake and a fortune hunter. You're better off without his attention." "That's easy for you to say," Margaret retorted, anger flaring. "You've secured your future with a wealthy bride. My mother and I face ruin without a suitable match. Is that why you're here, hoping I might compensate you for the loss of Willoughby's interest?" The bitterness in his voice strung. "How dare you?" she whispered fiercely. "I came because, despite everything, I thought you deserved the courtesy of an explanation. Clearly, I was mistaken. She began to rise, but Maxwell's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Wait, please. Forgive me, that was unworthy. After a moment's hesitation, Margaret settled back into her chair, her anger cooling in the face of his evident remorse. I didn't ask you here to quarrel, he said quietly. I asked you here because after our dance last night, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have been, what should have been. Maxwell, let me finish, please. His blue eyes were earnest, almost desperate. My engagement to Elizabeth was arranged by our families. It's a business transaction, nothing more. She understands this as well as I do. She has her own reasons for agreeing to the match. That doesn't change anything, Margaret pointed out. You're still betrothed to her. What if I weren't? Maxwell leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. What if there was another way to save my family's estate without sacrificing my chance at happiness? Our chance at happiness. Margaret stared at him, hardly daring to hope. What are you saying? Before he could answer, the tea-room door opened, and Lady Elizabeth Harrington herself entered, accompanied by her mother. Margaret tensed, preparing for a scene, but Maxwell appeared unfazed. Perfect timing, he murmured, raising a hand to signal to the newcomers. To Margaret's astonishment, Lady Elizabeth smiled upon seeing them and made her way to their table, her mother following with a serene expression. Lady Margaret, how lovely to see you again, Elizabeth said warmly, taking the seat beside Maxwell as if this meeting had been prearranged. I hope we haven't kept you waiting. Margaret looked from Elizabeth to Maxwell in confusion. No, not at all. Excellent, said Lady Harrington, settling her considerable bulk into the remaining chair. Now we can get down to business. Business, Margaret echoed, feeling increasingly bewildered. Maxwell took her hand across the table. Margaret, what I was about to explain is that Elizabeth and I have come to an understanding. We wish to break our engagement. But only in such a way that neither family loses face, Elizabeth added quickly. And more importantly, in a way that addresses the financial concerns that led to our betrothal in the first place. Lady Harrington nodded approvingly. My daughter has confided in me her reluctance to marry Lord Kincaid. She has affections elsewhere, you see. With my cousin, Thomas Raleigh, Elizabeth admitted, a blush colouring her cheeks. He has no title, no fortune to speak of. My father would never approve a match between us. Unless, Maxwell interjected, Elizabeth were to be jilted by a more socially prestigious fiancé, creating a scandal that would make a hasty marriage to a respectable but less illustrious gentleman seem the prudent course. Margaret's mind raced as she began to understand the scheme. You wish to create a scandal deliberately. A controlled scandal, Lady Harrington corrected. One that allows Elizabeth to marry the man she loves while preserving the dignity of both our families. But what about your estate? Margaret asked Maxwell. The debts you spoke of. That's where Lady Harrington has been most generous, Maxwell explained. She has agreed to provide the financial assistance my estate needs, not as a dowry, but as an investment. In return, the Harringtons will receive a share of profits from the coal deposits recently discovered on Kincaid land. Margaret looked at each of them in turn, scarcely believing what she was hearing. And how do I fit into this plan? Elizabeth smiled. We need a reason for Maxwell to break our engagement that will seem both scandalous enough to create gossip, yet honourable enough that he won't be ostracised from society. In short, Maxwell said, squeezing Margaret's hand, I need to be discovered in a compromising situation with a lady of good family. A lady I genuinely love and wish to marry. The world seemed to stop for a moment as Maxwell's words sank in. You wish to marry me? I always have, he said softly. I never stopped loving you, Margaret, not for a single day. Lady Harrington cleared her throat. The plan is quite straightforward. You and Lord Kincaid will be discovered in an embrace at Lady Rutherford's garden party tomorrow. I will create the scene, expressing outrage on my daughter's behalf. Elizabeth will dissolve into tears and break the engagement publicly. Within a week, Elizabeth continued, rumours of my previous attachment to Thomas will begin to circulate. My father, eager to salvage the situation, will consent to our marriage. Meanwhile, Maxwell will make a grand gesture of proposing to you, turning a potential disgrace into a romantic narrative. Margaret looked at Maxwell, hardly daring to believe this could be real. And if I agree to this scheme, what happens then? Then we marry, he said simply. We restore both our families' fortunes through honest means, and we build the life together that we should have had all along. It's quite brilliant, really, Lady Harrington declared. Everyone gets what they want, and society has a delicious scandal to gossip about for at least a month. Margaret shook her head, torn between laughter and disbelief. This is madness. Perhaps, Maxwell acknowledged. But isn't love always a bit mad? The question is, Margaret Kensington, are you mad enough to take this chance with me? For the first time in 3 years, Margaret felt hope blooming in her heart. What about Lord Willoughby? After last night, he already suspects there is something between us. All the better, Elizabeth said, with a dismissive wave. It makes our little drama more believable if there are already whispers. Margaret took a deep breath, considering the risks, the potential for disaster if their plan went awry. And yet, looking into Maxwell's eyes, she found she no longer cared about safety or security or even propriety. Yes, she said finally, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, I'm mad enough. The garden party at Lady Rutherford's estate was in full swing when Margaret arrived with her mother. The grounds were awash with colourful gowns and parasols, guests strolling along the manicured paths or gathered in small groups beneath the shade of ancient oaks. Margaret's pulse raced as she spotted Maxwell across the lawn, standing with a group of gentlemen near the rose garden. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. The plan was in motion. "Margaret, dear, there's Lord Willoughby," her mother said, gesturing toward a figure near the refreshment tent. "Perhaps you should speak with him, clear up any misunderstanding." "Not now, mother," Margaret replied, her attention fixed on her role in the drama about to unfold. "I believe I'll take a turn about the rose garden. It's said to be Lady Rutherford's pride." Before her mother could object, Margaret moved away, making her way slowly toward the prearranged meeting spot. As she passed through an archway covered in climbing roses, she felt a hand catch her elbow, drawing her off the path and behind a tall hedge. "Right on time," Maxwell murmured, his eyes alight with excitement and something deeper, more profound. Margaret glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Are you certain about this? Once it's done, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything." He took her hands in his. "Are you having second thoughts?" She shook her head. "No. But I'm afraid for you. Your reputation is nothing compared to the chance to spend my life with you." Maxwell drew her closer. "I love you, Margaret. I should have fought harder for us 3 years ago. I won't make that mistake again." Before she could respond, he bent his head and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded. For a moment, the elaborate plan faded from her mind, and there was only Maxwell, his arms around her, his lips on hers. Then, right on cue, came the sound of approaching voices. "I believe I saw Lady Margaret heading this way," Lady Harrington said loudly, her voice carrying clearly over the hedge. "Perhaps she's admiring the roses, mother," came Elizabeth's equally theatrical reply. Maxwell and Margaret broke apart, but not too hastily. This was, after all, meant to be witnessed. Lady Harrington rounded the corner of the hedge, Elizabeth at her side, and stopped with a perfectly executed gasp of shock. "Lord Kincaid, what is the meaning of this?" Her voice rose to a carrying pitch that immediately drew the attention of nearby guests. Maxwell stepped slightly in front of Margaret, as if to protect her, though this too was part of their choreography. "Lady Harrington," he began, his tone appropriately grave but not repentant. "I can explain." "Explain?" Lady Harrington advanced on them, her face a mask of outrage. "You stand here embracing another woman while betrothed to my daughter, and you think you can explain." By now a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Among them, Margaret spotted her mother, her face pale with shock, and Lord Willoughby, watching the scene with narrowed eyes. Elizabeth stepped forward, tears streaming down her face in a convincing display of heartbreak. "How could you, Maxwell? I trusted you." "Elizabeth, please," Maxwell said, maintaining the charade. "I never meant to hurt you." "Never meant to," Elizabeth broke off with a sob. Our engagement is over, do you hear me? Over. She yanked a diamond ring from her finger and threw it at Maxwell's feet before turning and fleeing through the crowd, her mother hurrying after her with continued exclamations of outrage. A shocked murmur rippled through the onlookers. Margaret stood frozen, feeling every eye upon her, judging, condemning. This had been the plan, but the reality of being at the center of such a scandal was more overwhelming than she had anticipated. Then Maxwell took her hand, his touch grounding her. "I'm sorry you had to witness that scene," he said, speaking now to the crowd. "But I cannot and will not apologize for following my heart." Lord Rutherford, their host, stepped forward with a thunderous expression. "Kincaid, this is beyond the pale. I think it best if you leave my property immediately." "Of course," Maxwell agreed with dignity. "But first," he turned to Margaret, dropping to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Lady Margaret Kensington, I have loved you since we were scarcely more than children. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Margaret was vaguely aware of her mother swaying on her feet, supported by a quick-thinking neighbor. Looking down into Maxwell's eyes, seeing the love and hope reflected there, Margaret knew that whatever came next, condemnation, ostracism, gossip, it would be worth it. "Yes," she said clearly, loud enough for all to hear. "Yes, I will marry you." Maxwell rose to his feet, and in defiance of all propriety, kissed her hand before turning to face Lord Rutherford again. "Now we shall take our leave," he said with a bow. "I trust that satisfies honor, Lord Rutherford." The older man harumphed, but made no further objection as Maxwell led Margaret through the parting crowd toward the exit. As they passed Lord Willoughby, he gave them a speculative look. "Well played, Kincaid," he murmured, too low for others to hear. "Well played indeed." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of gossip, recriminations, and surprisingly, reconciliations. As planned, rumors began to circulate about Elizabeth's previous attachment to Thomas Raleigh, creating a narrative that painted Maxwell as honorable for stepping aside rather than forcing Elizabeth into a loveless marriage. Lady Kensington, after recovering from her initial shock and delivering a blistering lecture on propriety, had eventually been won over by the promise of financial security that Maxwell's proposal represented. The discovery that her daughter would become Lady Kincaid, mistress of an ancient estate, went a long way toward soothing her wounded sensibilities. The wedding was set for early autumn, a small affair by aristocratic standards, but elegant nonetheless. As Margaret stood in her bedchamber on the morning of her wedding day, watching her maid arrange the veil on her dark hair, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in the span of a few short months. A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Elizabeth, now Mrs. Thomas Raleigh, radiant in her happiness. "You look beautiful," Elizabeth declared, embracing Margaret warmly. "Maxwell won't be able to speak when he sees you." Margaret smiled, still somewhat amazed by the genuine friendship that had developed between them. "Thank you for coming. And for everything else." "We conspirators must stick together," Elizabeth replied with a laugh. "Besides, Thomas and I owe our happiness to you as much as you owe yours to us. It's a fair exchange." "Is there much gossip still?" Margaret couldn't help asking. Despite her joy, she remained sensitive to the judgment of society. Elizabeth shrugged. "Some, of course, there always is, but it's already fading. By Christmas, some new scandal will have captured everyone's attention and will be old news." "I hope you're right." "I know I am." Elizabeth squeezed her hand. "Now, are you ready to become Lady Kincaid?" Margaret took a deep breath and nodded. "More than ready." The ceremony was everything Margaret had ever dreamed of, made more precious by the obstacles they had overcome. As she stood beside Maxwell before the altar, exchanging vows that would bind them together for life, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the universe had finally aligned as it should. "I, Maxwell, take thee, Margaret, to be my wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I plight thee my troth." As she repeated the ancient words, Promising herself to him with equal certainty, Margaret knew that the false belief she had clung to for so long, that love was a luxury reserved for the fortunate, had been utterly shattered. Love, true love, was not a matter of fortune or status. It was a choice, a leap of faith, an act of courage. Later, as they danced together at their wedding breakfast, Maxwell held her close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "Are you happy, Lady Kincaid?" Margaret looked up at him, at the man who had risked everything for her, who had taught her that some things were worth fighting for, worth even a scandal. "Perfectly happy," she replied, and it was the simple truth. "Though I must confess, I never expected our path to happiness would involve quite so much drama." Maxwell laughed, the sound rich and free. "What's a little scandal in the grand scheme of things? Besides, I have it on good authority that nothing captures society's heart like a reformed rake who throws everything aside for love." "Is that what you are?" "A reformed rake," Margaret teased. "If that's the role I must play to keep you by my side, then yes." He twirled her expertly as the music swelled. "But you and I know the truth. I was simply a man who recognized, perhaps too late, that duty without love is an empty obligation, and that true happiness comes not from following society's expectations, but from having the courage to follow one's heart." As midnight approached and the celebrations continued around them, Maxwell led Margaret out onto the terrace, where the autumn air was crisp and the stars glittered overhead like diamonds. "Do you remember that night at the Harrington ball?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Our dance at midnight in the conservatory." Margaret nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I remember thinking it might be our last dance together. And instead it was just the beginning." Maxwell stroked her cheek tenderly. "Dance with me now, my love. Not as two people bound by duty or convention, but as husband and wife, free to love each other openly, honestly, completely." As they swayed together beneath the stars, Margaret knew that this moment, this man, this love, was everything she had ever truly wanted, even when she had convinced herself it was impossible. The false belief that had governed her life for so long had been replaced by a new truth. That love, real love, was not a luxury but a necessity, as vital as air, as sustaining as water, as transformative as fire. And as the clock struck midnight, marking the end of their wedding day and the beginning of their life together, Margaret Kensington, now Lady Kincaid, kissed her husband with all the passion and joy in her heart, grateful beyond words for the dance at midnight that had changed everything.